This video lecture has been produced using artificial intelligence with the supervision of Belhaven faculty. Welcome. In this explainer, we're going to dive into how schools can use data to drive real, continuous improvement. We'll explore a key idea here. Using data effectively isn't just about crunching numbers. It's really about building a culture, one with shared beliefs, supportive leadership, and structured collaboration. So here's how we'll walk through this. We'll start with the core premise of why data matters in the first place. Then we'll get real about the challenges schools often face. From there, we'll lay out a solid foundation for success and look at specific strategies to bring it all to life. And we'll wrap up with some important questions for you to reflect on your own practice. All right, let's start with the why. Why are assessments so absolutely fundamental to the whole process of school improvement? This is really the bedrock of everything we're going to discuss. Our main goals here are pretty straightforward: to really get a handle on the importance of benchmark assessments, and to be able to tell the difference between two key types, formative and summative. Just think of formative assessments as check-ins along the way. They let us see what students are learning in real time so we can adjust our teaching on the fly. Summative assessments, on the other hand, they're more like the final exam, measuring what was learned at the very end of a unit. Okay, so that's the ideal. But let's ground this in reality for a moment by looking at the common obstacles that so often get in the way of using data effectively in schools. It really boils down to three big challenges we have to tackle. First, getting the right data to teachers in a way that's actually usable, something they can understand and act on. Second, putting the right structures in place so teachers can collaborate with their colleagues. And third, establishing leadership that holds the entire process and the people in it accountable. Because let's face it, this kind of improvement just doesn't happen on its own. So, having defined the problem, let's now turn to the bedrock of the solution. These are the absolutely essential preconditions, the foundation you need for any successful data-driven strategy. There are 5 of these preconditions, and you can think of them as non-negotiables for making data use effective. They really form the essential foundation for building a data-driven culture. Let's take a closer look at each one. First up, the data itself has to be appropriate. What does that mean? It means it has to come from high-quality formative assessments. It must be rigorously aligned with academic standards, and it needs to be used consistently across all the relevant subject areas. Second, a shared vision is absolutely crucial. When the entire staff agrees on the big things, what to teach, how to assess, it creates this powerful sense of coherence. And that shared understanding is what makes using data truly effective, instead of it just being another task to check off a list. Third, and this is a really critical point, is leadership encouragement and support. A vision doesn't mean much if it isn't modeled and reinforced from the top. Administration has to be active in monitoring implementation, fostering shared leadership, and reinforcing collaboration. They need to evaluate performance, keep an eye on school-wide data, and maybe most importantly, hold that structured collaboration time as sacred. So, with those foundational pieces in place, let's now look at some specific, actionable strategies that really bring this framework to life. How do we actually put all these ideas into practice? Now, what's really interesting here is how this makes collaboration concrete. Professional communities have to formalize their commitments. This means agreeing on learning goals, on assessment practices, and on clear plans for both intervention and enrichment. They have to review data together and, critically, hold both themselves and the group accountable for the results. A structured communication protocol, like the one you see here, provides a safe and incredibly effective process for peer critique and instructional improvement. By following these clear steps, from bringing in materials for review all the way to reporting back on improvements, teams can build new skills together in a really supportive environment. Instructional coherence is where we really start to move beyond the focus of just one classroom. It involves both horizontal alignment, what's happening across a grade level, and vertical alignment, how learning builds from one grade to the next. The process itself is simple but very powerful. Grade level teams bring in examples of student work, and then that work gets analyzed across different grades and achievement levels. And this entire process is driven by 3 key questions. And these questions really illustrate the focus of that collaborative work. First, what does the student actually know and understand right now? Second, what questions would you ask to dig a little deeper? And third, what specific strategies would you use to help this student get to the next level? You can see how this guides the analysis from understanding to inquiry and finally to action. This matrix is an incredibly powerful tool for looking at student performance. Teachers work together to place students into one of 4 quadrants based on their perceived ability and their actual achievement. For instance, quadrant 1 is for students who have the ability and are achieving. But quadrant 2, that's for students who seem to have the ability but for some reason are not achieving. So after the students are mapped onto the matrix, the essential question for the team becomes this: what specific actions can we take in each quadrant to move every single student forward? This question really shifts the focus from just analyzing to actively planning school-wide efforts for improvement. Finally, when it comes to monitoring how the vision is being implemented, we can't just rely on self-assessment alone. It's often just not an accurate predictor. To get a true picture, you really need objective external observations and demonstrations. A key strategy here is creating a specific tool to use right alongside teacher self-assessment to make sure everyone is staying true to the vision. To conclude, let's shift from the framework itself to your own practice. We're going to consider a series of reflective questions that can help you apply these concepts. So first, take a moment and think about your own school. What would it truly take to get teachers to fully embrace data as a tool for improving not just their teaching, but also their students' learning? What are the practical barriers, and what kind of cultural shifts would need to take place? Now, let's zoom out a bit. How does that day-to-day use of data in a classroom connect to the school's bigger picture, its overall goals for improvement? Why is what teachers do with data every single day so critical for the school's long-term success? We've talked a lot about collaboration today. So why is it that using data effectively is more of a team sport, not an individual one? What is it about those collaborative structures we discussed that makes them so essential for having a real impact? And let's bring it all back to the why. How does the technical work of data analysis actually fuel the school's mission? Why is data so important for bringing a school's core vision to life in a meaningful way? And finally, let's get practical. I want you to take stock of the current reality in your school. What collaborative structures for using data already exist? And now, thinking about everything we've discussed, the real question is, how will you strengthen them? Because strengthening those structures, that's the first step toward transforming your school's vision into every student's reality.